You're my first 3-time guest.
Oh my gosh, am I really?
This is the first time that I've had someone on 3 times. That says a lot about you, man.
I don't know about that. I think I might say more maybe about like Garth Brooks. So who is like the biggest person you've had on this show in your estimation?
Gosh, who would be the biggest? Oh, I had Kerry Walsh Jennings, the Olympic volleyball
Oh yeah,
player. I've had
yeah.
Paul Reiser. I've had TJ Miller, the actor and comedian.
Hmm.
I've had a bunch of country singers on. Because I mean, that's where that's what I do. That's where I go. So I don't know. I'm 200 something episodes into this. By the way,
Yep.
folks, Sam LaCrosse. I know you've read all of the things before you clicked on this episode, but it's Sam LaCrosse, the author of Value Economics, which a book that literally changed my life, I think, because it just made me say, wow, you can truly be honest with yourself. And by doing so, you can do that way with everybody else. And then Toxic Immaturity. And then we'll have word on the third book because, that would explain the 3 times. But no, it's but as I was saying about the podcast, you operate in the future. So if I don't record another podcast today, I've got enough to take me 5 months.
Yeah, sure.
Because you have to
Yeah.
have them. You have to have them stacked up and ready to go.
Yep. And it's just, that's the cool thing about like when you get consistent about content in whatever form, you can really kind of have a lot of things ready. So if something does come up, like, for example, I'm in Austin, my family's in Cleveland. So I'm going to be going back 2 times in the next 2 months for holidays and stuff like that. So I will not be able to probably sit down and diligently get a lot of stuff done in the time frame that I need to. And so I need to be able to take myself wherever I'm at. And now that I'm, off the corporate grind and doing my own thing full time now, I need to kind of be attached to things. And so the location doesn't matter, but it's a lot of things involving preparation that have mattered a lot more ever since, especially that transition happened. But I've always put an emphasis on in terms of my own content and stuff as well. So I agree with that totally.
Well, it's the other thing. And when you work for yourself, I mean, listen, if you're not working, there's no money coming in. But what I
Yeah.
do like is that, if I work it right, I try to take the holidays off. And by the holidays, I mean Thanksgiving through New Year's,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is something I've never been able to do. And again, I still work because I have the stream at krty.com. But like this and my team, I like to be able to tell my team, hey, okay, we're just going to do bare minimum. We're going to do holiday hours. Right.
Hmm.
And just because I want you guys to go and have your holiday and I want you to have that time. So,
Yeah.
when it comes to content and you use the word diligent, and if I have anything to say about you may be one of the most diligent people I've known, especially for your age. Uh, you've seen it's like that diligent linebacker in college or in high school,
Hmm.
the guy who
Hmm.
would get up and do the workout every morning from 4 till 6, and then go to
Yeah.
school and then study tape and stuff like that. And he may not have made it to the pros, but he got every ounce of what he had out of it.
Yeah.
And I feel
Yeah.
that way about you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And it's funny because my dad played defense in high school. He was a much better high school football player than I was. And so he had his people that he looked up to, and the 2 people that I think really he looked up to the most, and you're up near one of them, so you probably know this all too well. He really looked up to Ronnie Lott from the 49ers, and he looked up to Mike Singletary. And the 2 things, and I think that this is especially true about Mike Singletary, but Ronnie Lott, he played safety, so that was kind of his safety person. But Mike Singletary, he like laughs every time he speaks, and he replays this famous rant like over and over again inside of his head, a bunch of times. And so the thing that, really stuck out with Mike Singletary to my dad was his eyes. And if you ever look at Mike Singletary, like his pupils are like the biggest things you've ever seen. They take up like all of his eyes. And he was always like looking here, looking back and forth, whatever. And so he would always work so hard, obviously, and he would be in the weight room. He was the heartbeat of that 85 defense and the Bears and everything. And I think for me, the diligence and the discipline involved with it has been really my calling card throughout my entire life, to be honest with you. And I've had to build it from a very young age, especially since I left college or left for college, excuse me, when I was 18. And I really was putting myself together and everything. And I think really since I've gotten into my business more, I realize how many people don't have that. And because people would always say something like you just said, Gary, and they would say like, Sam, you're really disciplined, you're really diligent, you have all these things put together. And I would say, thank you. But I would say, okay, is it really kind of a rare thing that people are this regimented and stuff? And I think that there's a lot of reasons why I am. I just didn't really know how kind of maybe psychopathic I was about kind of getting everything, ready to go for all the things that I put out. But if the only reason I'm really able to compete is because of something like that. I don't think I'm outwardly special or talented or anything like that. It just I work really, really, really hard, and I work a lot. And I think over time, the quantity and the strategy of applying that quantity is really, really essential in many ways.
Well, the thing, because I've been alive a lot longer than you, what you'll find is, yeah, it is that rare. It is that rare in every aspect of life. I was telling my son, because I have a teenager, I said, if I had the time machine and I could go back and talk to myself, I would just ask myself to try a little harder. Don't go
Yeah.
balls to the wall. Just
Yeah.
try a little harder, because he's taking Spanish and he's kind of struggling with it a little bit. And I said, I get it. I took French in college, and I said I
Hmm.
did just enough to pass.
To get by.
I well, yeah, I figured out a way for the final exam. You had to give a speech, and what I
Hmm.
did is I sat down with a joke book and translated into
Okay.
jokes in
Yeah.
French. And the teacher was so thrilled that somebody did something different. He was actually helping me finish the jokes. And afterwards he told me, listen, you can't speak French in it that much, but you were creative. I'm going to give you a B minus and tell you to get the hell out of my class.
Wow.
Sold.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Right.
so sold, because I was an English lit major, so I had to take that. But I wish I would have gone back and said, gosh, Garrett, you could have done that. You could have figured out how to do it. You could have done better in that. And you wouldn't
Hmm.
have had to do 9 hours in the library every night, but you could have put 45 minutes into it,
Yeah.
and you could have been better. And so that attitude that you have of like, no, no, I'm gonna wring out every ounce of this. It is rare. That is your superpower. That's what allows you to compete on levels that other people will never dream about. You're not even 30 yet. You're working on your third book. You've already had a job where you were making an insane amount of money, and
Yeah.
had the temerity to go, I'm going to walk away from this and live life on my terms, because I know I can work. That
Hmm.
is that is tremendously rare. You want to talk about the 1%? That's the 1%.
Well, thank you. I've actually never thought about it that way in terms of I think that might be a big reason why a lot of people don't take the leap or take the chance or on whatever the thing is, whether it's leaving a job or starting something or asking person on a date or something like that. I think that might be a big reason as to why is that they know that they don't have the work ethic to do so. And I've never thought about it in that context in terms of like if no one is motivating me, if I'm not meeting with my manager at 11 o'clock on Monday every single week, if I'm not, getting these type of leads inside of my system, I think that is kind of what psychs a lot of people out to anything. And I think that there's a lot to be said in a world that is kind of going away from merit and effort and exceptionalism and a lot of other things that the people that really stick to what has worked, that is stick to the bread and butter of those things are going to get ahead, not just by the pace that they were getting ahead by earlier on, but that it's going to stratify even further. And I think that's what I'm seeing from a lot of things. And I think like I have an analogy that I use for myself quite a bit, and I tell to others, and it's in my businesses and everything. I talk about it all the time. It's the rocket ship analogy. So a lot of people think that when you send a rocket from the Earth to Mars or Earth to the Moon, that that's a long time. It's probably the fuel is going to be evenly distributed throughout the entire time, just as we think like a car would. As you're driving like 30 miles down the street, you're not going to burn, all other things being equal, you're not going to burn more gas going from mile 25 to 30 as you're going from 1 to 5. It's just going to be gas mileage. But with rockets, it's different. And so rockets, no matter where they're going in the atmosphere, it's almost kind of like a universal law in outer space. They burn 80% of their fuel from the Earth to the atmosphere. And so that is what I've been using to describe myself and my journey throughout all of these things. And I try to teach to my clients and everything that really comes to me throughout all these endeavors that I'm in is that you just got to get out of the atmosphere. You just got to get out of the atmosphere. And then afterwards, everything is like small tweaks and just trying your best not to crash it. And then afterwards, I think everything really takes care of itself. So the majority of the effort is to get out of the atmosphere and whatever that thing is. So for me, it's like just make the outline, get the book done, get it out, build the product, start the business, like do whatever it's going to be. And, that is kind of the something I think a lot of people don't realize is that it's going to be the hardest at the start of whatever that thing is going to be. And it always gets easier. And I'm experiencing that now. And I'm really amazed by it because it applies to everything. And now I'm not married. I don't have, a girlfriend or anything. So marriage and relationships might be different. I would imagine in some ways they probably are. But I would say in all the practical things, like just starting something or accomplishing a goal in some way, I think it's the same across everything. And it's been kind of mind blowing to witness because the thing that leads to is what I am really just asserting is a critical mass problem. So from every massively successful person that I've seen that's been able to not only achieve success, but sustain success, is that they get a critical mass of something. They achieve a certain revenue metric in their business and they can plow that money back into ads and they can scale revenue further. Or they can have a certain amount of followers and their YouTube channel gets monetized and it goes over and over and over and over again. And it's funny because, as you know, I to make a lot of content, I absorb a lot of content as you do. And so I follow a lot of people on their YouTube channels and their podcasts and things like that. And so I don't know how much you really pay attention to like top podcast charts and everything, but I remember Chris Williamson and listening to him back in 2020. I remember I listened to a podcast with him and Douglas Murray when I was visiting my friend Sam Jarek in Chicago. He was a player, he was captain for the Northwestern football team, and I went to see one of his games. And I remember Chris at that time maybe had 100,000 Instagram followers. And now he has over 3 million subscribers on YouTube 4 years later. And he's the second biggest podcaster in the world outside of Joe Rogan and maybe Tucker Carlson. And so people are like, wow, Chris Williamson's like this awesome person. But I saw Chris hit that critical mass. And then it just accelerated, and grew as far as it can. And that's where there's a principle and a bit, it comes from the Bible. It's the Matthew principle where it says, to those who have everything, essentially more will be given. And for those who have nothing, more will be taken. And I think it's basically like winners win, losers lose at a certain point. And I think that when you get to a certain threshold of winning, and when you get past that, you just start to win more. And I think the same is probably true in the inverse, but fortunately, I've just experienced the first part of that parable and not the back part of it in more areas than not, which is a blessing. So
it's an interesting thing, and you follow Sam, and I love your podcast. I love your rants. You know that, and your net worth is not you're who you are.
yeah,
And it's the success thing, what we hope for success, what we think of success, that there comes a price with that. There was a freedom that Chris Williams had when he was at 100,000, because you can make a pretty good
that's
living
right.
and go from there. When it accelerates into that million, there becomes responsibility. And
Yes.
also with the money, and that's what makes Rogan so amazing, is that he freely admits, I went to Spotify for the money. That's
Yeah.
it was just so much money, I could not turn it down. And luckily, he is the one guy who is so big. And Tucker Carlson, I'll throw that in there. You
Yeah.
can't cancel him. You cannot cancel him. And I thought it was really telling when, the people at Spotify and even at Netflix with Dave Chappelle said, hey, if you need to quit, okay, you go quit, because he's more valuable than you are.
Yeah.
But there comes that weight, right? When we're doing what we're doing. And somebody asked me a couple of months ago, what would you like? How big would you like to get? And I'm like, very interesting question. I would like the money, but I wouldn't like the responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the bad thing about the money is you become beholden to the money. I mean, as just so somebody's politics, right?
hmm
So, and I'm just picking him, Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel
Yeah.
has went hard left. He didn't used to be hard left. And his buddy Adam Carolla is still pretty conservative. But even he has admitted, because Jimmy can't say it, once you start making $30 million a year to work 3 days a week, that's kind of hard money to walk away from.
hmm
Because, wow, somebody's going to, and you would think at some point you'd have, well, I have enough money now. It doesn't matter. No, you find a way to spend the $30 million
Yeah. Right.
and,
Right.
and you spend what you have. It's a fascinating. It's fascinating to be so diligent and to be cognizant. And I find those guys who have reached that pinnacle very interesting. And when you sit back and go, would I want that? You want the money, but do you want everything else?
Yeah. I remember, I think that the best visual example I ever saw of this was when Netflix did The Last Dance. They did the 10-part documentary on Jordan and the Bulls. And there was this one scene, I don't know if you remember this, where it's like deep into, I think it's like after Jordan came back out of his mini retirement that he did to go play baseball. And he's up in a hotel room at one point. They're in some city and he's like a prisoner because he can't go outside because people know that Michael Jordan's staying in that hotel. And so there's like a line and a mob of people outside of the hotel. And he's just sitting in his like Jordan was, the thing that I learned about Jordan so much was like how like normal and cool he was because he would just like smoke cigars and like eat a box of pizza before a game and then go out and like score 40 points. Like he was amazing like that. And so, he's just sitting up there and he's lying on the couch and they take the camera and they look down at the sidewalk and the people are like looking up at his room and stuff. And you realize that, like, oh wow, like that's his life. Like that's how he needs to live because he's Michael Jordan. And I think, it's the stewardship of the responsibility, not necessarily the money, that really gets you where I think you become one of those untouchable people. And I forget who said this, but it's almost like the line from Star Wars where Obi-Wan Kenobi tells Darth Vader, strike me down and I'll be more powerful than you can ever imagine. And that's what's happened to almost everyone that has been canceled because Rogan and Tucker and a bunch of other people. I don't think Chris has had to deal with this, but a lot of people have been canceled pretty viciously in a lot of different ways. But now you look at them and they don't have to answer to anybody. They're their own conglomerate. Now Rogan has branched out of Spotify. He's no longer Spotify exclusive, even though he's still being paid from that. He's on YouTube, he's on Apple, he's on all these other platforms. And so he's kind of been able to branch out to all these things. He owns his own, basically, his rights to his show. He owns everything there. And I think that's where, I was speaking of Adam Carolla and not necessarily Jimmy Kimmel, but Adam Carolla. I cited this in my post that I did when I left corporate, and it was inside of my Substack, and I quoted it on my podcast that I did the same thing, where he was talking to Tucker about this. And so I thought Tucker said something very interesting, where he said, the future is going to be made by people who own all of their own stuff and who have the most amount of freedom possible. And you just can't be as free as you want to if you're beholden to somebody else who really controls your pocketbook, your health insurance, all of those type of things. If you want to make a truly sizable impact, you need to be free from those things. And he mentioned my old company by name in that sentence. And I said like, oh wow, like that was kind of like to me, it was more of like a moment of divine providence. So I've kind of been obsessed with that over the last couple of months about what can I do to become more sovereign? What can I do to own more of my own stuff? And I think that, that's the thing that I've been really chasing after, for the longest time. And I think I'm finally starting to get there is that I have sovereignty in the way that I live my life. I don't have to necessarily answer to anybody, but I'm a Christian, so I answer to God, and that's it. And I don't want it to be any more of those things. I don't want anybody to kind of have a say inside of, my life that I don't respect, that doesn't share my values. And obviously I have responsibilities to, I have a lot of responsibilities. Like I said, I don't have a family, but what I've tried to do, and I was actually just writing about this I wrote my end of year reflection article that I do, my state address I do for Value Economics at the end of every year. And I was writing because at the end of the year or the whole back half of this year, after I left my job, especially, I went through what I can only describe and I have described as a very positive existential crisis. And because I had basically tapped out all the things I wanted to do, and I had done all the things that I wanted to do, and I wasn't driven for the first time in my entire life. So you talked earlier about and said very nice things about my discipline earlier on, and I went through a very, very terrifying period of my life for a very, very long time after I left my job because I wasn't chasing anything anymore. And so my answer to that question, and what I've been really putting an emphasis and focus on, is that okay, I'm 27 now. I basically I'm a third of the way there. I'm going to die probably another 54 years, according to the math, in a lot of ways before that potentially. So my first third of my life is over, essentially. Like it's done. I canned it. And so now I'm going to be dedicating the rest of my life to helping serve as many people as possible because I think I've tapped out all of my single potential in a lot of ways in terms of like, I own a home. I'm making good money. I have my own companies. I can say what I want. I can do what I want. I restructured my relationship with my old publisher after their new leadership got in. And I still am mind blown that that's even still a thing now. But we have a really, really good relationship. The CEO, Eric Jorgensen, and I get along quite well. And so we've been able to rebuild that. And so they'll never censor me. They'll never throw my books out unless they alter their contracts or whatever. And so I think that it's the unselfish nature of my life that is going to define it for the foreseeable future. And I think that that is in a lot of ways wonderful because I can take that responsibility that you mentioned and make it so that I'm not fulfilling myself. And I think that because I think I've already done that for the most part. I want to make other people happy. I want to serve other people. I want to throw all my resources behind other people. And I'll close with this, or at least on this answer, and then we'll go back to you. But my pastor, Doug Weckerman at my church, he gave a sermon a couple months ago around then I was like right in the thick of this. I was like really, really, getting anxious about this whole thing. And he gave a sermon about money at my church. And I heard that and I said, oh no, it's going to be another church sermon about money, tithe, give, like be responsible stewardship, whatever. And so I'm like, okay, I'll just brace myself for impact. And I love Doug. And Doug is like one of the best communicators I've ever heard in my life. And so I come in and I'm like, okay. And so it was about flipping the script on how we viewed money inside of our culture. And he said, what if we took the main status symbol around money not in terms of how much money you make, but in how much people gave away? And I said, okay, that's a reframe I can work with. Like, that's what I'm going to be funneling it into. Like, how much of this can I sow into my church or give to somebody else or do everything else? And I tithe and all those type of things. But how can I take that up a next level? And I have a lot of ideas for that I want to implement inside of my life, outside of my own personal endeavors. And, if a family comes along, then obviously that'll take precedent as well. But I think that's the answer to the responsibility question, is not necessarily being responsible to yourself, because there's a certain point, I think, where that just the well runs dry and you need to find that someplace else. And I'm just fortunate enough to have found those other places, I think.
I tell my pastor all the time, don't you ever get tired of writing sermons about me? You just got to be tired of it, right? Because every
Yeah.
time I go, you're talking directly to me. I know
Mhm.
you are.
Mhm.
And that's a brilliant thing about how, if you could redefine it, how much money do you give away?
Yeah.
And I heard, he said one time that a thing that stuck out with me is that gratitude, happiness does not bring gratitude. Gratitude
Yes,
brings
that's absolutely right.
happiness. So I've always remembered that. Well, I find it fascinating, and I love the idea of trying to, because when you're doing this and having the courage to go out, listen, and if you're Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson, it doesn't matter if YouTube cancels you, because they can't afford to. They can afford
Yeah.
to cancel you because they're just
Yeah.
cutting off their own nose to spite their face. But for everyone else, you have to go through those growing pains, as you've written about before, that it has to hurt. You have to have somebody come back at you. I'm sure this episode, somebody will come back on me just on this episode on some of the things that you and I will talk about. Because
Yeah.
I always say I don't have questions, but I have things that I would love to talk to you about, because I
Mhm.
just find you so interested. And again, if you read Value Economics, Toxic Immaturity, it is great observations on American life. And you had mentioned marriage. Now, you had recently a podcast that I thought was fascinating, talking about how young males in this
Mhm.
society are looking at foreign-born brides. You call them the passport bros? Is that what
So
I believe I
I
remember?
did not come up with that terminology. That is the internet terminology that I think is, and
Yeah,
yes, yeah, yeah, yeah.
because they're fighting the more of the traditional approach to marriage, right?
Mhm.
Which leads me into this. I'm going to tie it into another topic that you had.
Sure.
Therapy sucks. And the reason I'm tying that into it is because I agree in this respect. We get so introspective now that we, again, the old adage, if you don't have food, you have one problem. If you have food, now
Mhm.
you get to have all the problems. And I think especially in America, we look for problems.
Yeah.
and we don't look for the solution and the easy form of happiness, which is the thing about my marriage. I try to do this. If I make everything about her, if I wake up every morning and try to think about what can I do to serve my wife today,
Yeah.
and if she wakes up and thinks the same way about me, that's an easy path right there.
Pretty good deal. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's an easy path. So I wanted to tie those two together and get your thoughts on that.
Hmm.
Why? Because obviously, if you're going overseas and finding more of those traditional values, why aren't you finding them here?
Yeah. So that article caused quite a buzz, as you might
Yeah,
might
I can
imagine. And
imagine.
so that article caused a lot of reactions from it, mostly positive, I'll say. And it's funny because before we got on the show, a good friend of mine and a guy that I consider a mentor and a person that I think there's a lot of people say should look up to, but I truly look up to this person, Hafiz Bayoku, my friend who runs my men's group, The Affluent Standard. He was a very famous podcaster for quite a while. It's his channel's still up. He had over 500,000 subscribers. He interviewed some of the biggest people in the world: Lewis Howes, Jordan Peterson, Esther Perel, Jonathan Haidt, all the the heavyweights,
Hmm.
Charlamagne Tha God, all the people that were really, really and still are really, really huge. And so he stopped doing content when he started doing the men's group that we run together because he wanted to get. He kind of was, and I talk about this a lot in Toxic Immaturity, where it's a lot of just this cesspool of dating or not dating, but like men's advice in the internet, the manosphere and the red pill stuff and everything like that. And Hafiz was he was one of the few bright spots in that whole community because he would go into the lion's den among the people that said, hey, marriage is a sham, women are property, all those things. And he would debate these people every single time, like every single time. Like he would, and this was like pre-Andrew Tate in a lot of ways. And so this is like
Hmm.
before he was in there, but he kind of really came out. So like Fresh and Fit and Alpha Male Strategies and all the other people that are kind of in that sense, Just Pearly Things, Layla Halper and Jedediah Bila, all the people that are inside of that space. And he would go and he'd debate these people. And Hafiz was stalwart and basically did not give an inch in terms of his arguments and stuff. So he was, I mean, you want to talk about bravery, people slandering you on the internet. You have all the online men's crowd that are really going after him. And so Hafiz basically said, okay, this is not helping at this point. So I'm going to stop doing content. I'm going to stop. I mean, you talk about someone who was making a killing doing what he was doing. He was making tens of thousands of dollars a month off YouTube because he had all
Wow.
those views in this content. And he said, I'm going to give it up. I'm going to throw it in the can and I'm going to start this men's group and I'm going to sell suits and I'm going to do all these things to really, really work with the guys who are serious and not just curious. That's the phrase that he uses that I love and I use it all the time too. And so he's built this thing over the past almost 3 years. We're coming up on 3 years that we've been involved. And I actually met him when the night that I first met Jordan Peterson a couple of years ago, and I met him backstage. We got invited backstage by Jordan Peterson, and he met his family and everything else. He met his daughter Michaela and a bunch of things. And so I've known Hafiz for almost 3 years now, and he just started making content and again, and he's kind of getting into more of a commentary where he said a lot of the content for men online is very immature. It's like it's the red pill manosphere, put women down, like money muscles stuff, like all the cheap popcorn content.
Hmm.
And Hafiz wants to create a show where he's catering to the more mature, the content that men want, but they're not finding because they get dragged too deep into the red pill stuff. And so he released his first couple episodes this week, and they've been awesome. They're greatly. Hafiz is a phenomenal editor. He's a phenomenal filmographer, one of the best communicators I've ever heard in my entire life. And I watched the second episode first, and I got a text from my buddy Jamal, who's in my community with me. And so Jamal has been such a big supporter of my content, and he's such an articulate, such a smart guy. And I think his brain operates on a different level than mine does. So he's a great person too. And he texted me yesterday and he said, hey, Hafiz mentioned you in the second episode. And I said, oh no, because earlier that week, I put my Passport Bros article inside of our Discord that we have together. And I said, hey guys, this is my favorite thing I've written in months. What do you guys think about this? And Hafiz copied the link, he sent it in the general chat, he added everybody, and he said, guys, Sam's article, he's cooking in this one. And I say, I might have to do a video about this. And then you flash forward to the text Jamal sent me and he did a video about it. And so I pulled it up earlier today and I watched it. And he opened it up and and Hafiz is able to weave so many different things together. And he made such a phenomenal argument about marriage and culture and everything like that. And so going back to the point that I was making in the article in ways and about marriage and about relationships, um, I think what's happening is that, and I have a piece, we're recording this a week before the election. I have a piece
Mhm.
about the election. My election piece next Monday is going to be about something similar. It's not going to be about something different, but it's going to be about something similar. And what you've seen recently, and I credit this back to a guy named Daniel Cox, who wrote a study for, I forget which, he works for a think tank in DC, and he wrote a piece about the widening political divide between men and women, young men and women, especially inside of America. Young men or men and women have always somewhat differed politically. Women have leaned more left, men have leaned generally more right. But now, among people in the younger demographics, it is like miles apart in terms of where they're at politically. And that is a catastrophe in so many different ways, because politics is not your values, but politics in a lot of ways is a reflection of your values in certain ways. And when you have this gulf that's widening between people and between groups of people who are supposed to be complements rather than adversaries, and we've kind of confused the two, unfortunately, very, very much back and forth, you leave a lot of people with a dearth of options. And we were talking about this. I sent it to my men's group that I lead inside of my church yesterday. We talked about it for like a half an hour yesterday at my group, and I didn't intend for this to happen at all, but a lot of people had comments about it. And I'm fortunate to have, it was me, who I'm single. There was another single guy there, two guys that are engaged and one guy that's married. And so we had a good diversity and panacea of people who were kind of talking about this information together. And so the one thing that I kind of came back to, and my big reflection after that article kind of blew up a little bit, was that I've been very hard, as you know, and very critical about men in the last year, especially since Toxic Maturity came out. I pulled no punches. I spared no expense. I told it how it was. And my overall theme of the book is that men are falling off a cliff and it's men's fault. And we need to step up and we need to fix it. But as I also said earlier, a relationship is a two-way street, kind of like what you said to your wife. And the reality is that women have their issues as well. And I am seeing it metastasize in a way that is a specific type of woman, where it's young American white women, nationally born American white women. And the I've been thinking this for a while. I just didn't really know it had teeth. But I remember when I started to really explore this, and believe it or not, it was with my dad a couple of years ago, because I was on the phone with my dad one day. And my dad, especially back then, I was very insecure about my love life. I never told my parents anything because I was just so embarrassed. And I was like, the whole thing about like, I thought that they were like, I would, I'm not in a relationship still. So they'd ask me like, what am I doing? How am I meeting people? And then I get really angry, and I don't like getting angry at my parents. So I'm like, just don't ask me about it. And so they've done a very good job about that in the past. And so they really haven't asked me about it a lot. And that's improving and getting better as I've matured and things like that, because that wasn't the most emotionally mature thing to do. But I remember I was on the phone with my dad a couple of years ago, and my dad doesn't ask me a lot of questions about my love life. He doesn't ask me a lot of questions, at least back then he did, about everything else. And he just kind of, we were on a very unrelated topic, and he just blurted out, Sam, I think you should marry a Mexican girl. And I said, okay, like my dad has like never said anything that, suggestive to me before in my life. And I said, okay, well, why do you think that? And he said, Sam, there's a really big problem happening with young American white women. And I said, okay, tell me more. What's going on? And my dad is an engineer by trade, but now he's a business executive and a higher level executive inside of companies. And so he's involved with a lot of interviews in a lot of various different settings. And he says, Sam, the young white women compared to the young men in a lot of ways, and particularly the young minority women, the young minority men, are getting outcompeted like crazy. And they're not interesting. They don't have anything willing to work for to say. They don't have any original thoughts. They don't have a lot of things that are really coming in. And it's not every single one, but it's, if you had to categorize and make a generalization of the group, that is what the feedback would be about the group. And so I said, okay, if my dad's seeing this, then how is this playing out in the broader culture? How is this playing out in the broader culture? And so what I essentially said in the article is that young white women have been kind of the apple of the culture's eye in a lot of ways for forever, really. Like like I said, like White Chicks and all those movies back in the day, which were hilarious. I love that movie, and so that was one of the formative movies of my childhood. So like they were in all the hip hop videos. They were like in all the rappers dated white women. It was they were a big status symbol in a lot of ways. And so we've kind of seen this entitlement creep in with this group of folks. And I make very, very clear inside of the article is not strictly an issue of race, even though it is metastasizing as that. It is an issue of the values, of character, and of culture, I think, primarily. And so what I've seen now, especially in my life personally, is that the men's group that I mentioned that Hafiz runs, I am a minority in that group. Most of my friends are black or Hispanic or Asian. I don't have a lot of white friends in that group, and I have white friends. They're just not in that group, and that's been my primary social circle for a very, very long time. And what I've noticed is that being involved in Black, Latino, Asian circles is that their women operate very, very differently, and they behave very, very differently. And they seem to appreciate masculinity more, and they seem to be generally genuinely feminine more, and all those type of things. And I've grown more attracted to those type of women, not because of their skin color, where they come from, or what country they were born in. It's just because of the value system and the way that they kind of react and interact with men in all those type of ways. And so this has led to a reaction, and it starts on the internet, just like the Manosphere and Red Pill content stuff does, in terms of men who have been very, very disenfranchised by the dating market, and women who set their standards so high now. And men do the same thing, but this is men in relation to women. Women to set their standards so high, especially in that demographic I'm mentioning, that they're saying, you know what? I'm just not going to play your game anymore. And I'm going to go to the Philippines, or I'm going to go to South America, or I'm going to go to Africa or something. And I'm going to meet women there. And I'm going to get on a dating app and I'm going to meet women there. And it's working. And there's a massive community. There are like websites that help match you to people that do this, and women that do this across the things. And so this has caused a very big reaction from women online who have kind of been coming at white women a lot more than they have before, because they were, the sacred cow in a lot of ways culturally. And now they're kind of getting brought down to the competitive level. They're realizing the competitive landscape, and they're not really competitive in that way anymore. And so I was with my men's group last night, and we were talking about this. And Gary, if you had to guess, so like my church is like a really hip, young people, white people primarily church in the middle of Austin, Texas. So if you had to imagine what the demographic of that looks like, it's not a mega church, but it's got like a couple thousand congregates. It's like we got 5 services in the weekend, and the lobby is hot. And everybody that goes to this church is mostly young, hot, wealthy, successful, all those type of, it's just the demographic that we attract. And so the main thing that our pastors say, and I think they're right about this, because there's debates on whether they should help people get in relationships, things like that. My pastors have decided to not play that game, and so they don't help facilitate relationships for the most part. And so if you had to guess of the amount of successful approaches that I've heard from men approaching women in my church's lobby, out of like just a raw number, what would you guess in my
Well,
2 years of going there?
the premise, the way you set the premise up, I would say less than 10%.
Zero.
Well, that would be less than
I have heard of
10%.
yeah, and I have heard of zero, not even a percentage, a zero total, a raw number percentage of successful approaches by
Mhm.
men to women inside of the lobby. And they're primarily white, educated, wealthy, affluent, culturally, young women. And again, I have no problem with this group, this demographic of women. But if you told anybody that you have a 0% success rate in something, that is going to disincentivize that group who would want to participate and play that game. And I don't blame them in a lot of ways. So what's happening is that other women and other groups of women, I think for good reasons, are getting elevated in the strata of men. And so for me, for example, this has been a hard pivot for me, because I didn't grow up around a lot of minority people. I didn't grow up around a lot of Black people or Hispanic people or Asian people or whatever. I was primarily I was in a white Rust Belt town, primarily in, Northeast Ohio. And so I've just kind of been analyzing that in a lot of ways. And so from that standpoint, you have just a very shifty way and the only really way to kind of, I think, communicate this to women in a way that's beneficial is to say, maybe you're kind of the problem here, or the issue here, or maybe you have to kind of adjust your behavior, because we are a consequence of our behavior and our choices in regards to anything. And I think that's especially true because of dating. I tell guys this all the time, like this, you're perfect the way you are thing. And then you can just kind of present yourself however you want to. And people have to affirm you. They have to accept you. They have to do all these things. That's a nonsensical proposition on its face. And I remember I was very critical about this, because I have a section in my book where I basically say a specific example. And it was about a close family friend of mine. And my parents, they know me, they know our close friend group, and they were able to figure out the person I was criticizing in my book. And they told me that you shouldn't have done that. And I said, yes, I should have. I didn't back down. I said, yes, I should have, because it's true. And so the way I related it to, and we're going to get in really controversial territory here, but like the way I related to my mom was that, let's say a man now proclaims that he is a woman, and he says, you have to say that I'm a woman, and you have to call me she, and you have to treat me in a certain way. That is the same mentality and the same type of insanity that someone says, you know what? I'm desirable in the dating market, and damn it, you're going to like it. And you're going to tell me, and you're entitled, and I'm entitled to your love, and I'm entitled to you approaching me in the dating market. That's not how it works. That's just not how it works. And if we do that, and this is a big portion of what my third book is about, by the way, and if we do that, if we have that entitlement, that narcissism, that we just say, you know what, I can do whatever I want and throw all the restraints and the chains off me, and you have to, and I could be slovenly and overweight and, eating KFC every single day and not taking care of myself and not developing my social skills. But you know what? Women have to like me because I'm just that awesome. That's not how it works. And the same with men and the same with women. So what I would say, to kind of cap off this whole thing and to get out of my rant, I would say, to use your word for it, which I love.
I love your rants.
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of your rants. I
so,
tell you all the time.
I listen to the best ranters in the world. I have a collection of ranters that I have on repeat that I listen to quite often. But anyway, so like what the big point is general. We are a reflection of our behaviors and the choices that we adopt. And the young white women demographic, largely, collectively, I'm generalizing, has made, in my estimation, a lot of very poor behavior and choice-based decisions. And that has led to their struggle on the dating market. And they're being outcompeted by women of other races, of other cultures. And that's even true with me, because the last successful, I would say not even, well, I'm not married to her, so I guess not successful, but like the last girl that I was seriously involved with was born in Honduras. And I really, really enjoyed my time with her. And it was a lot, and I would never expect it from that way, but it was tangibly different. The conversation was different. The values were different. And I can only think that that's cultural in some way.
Yeah, it's to me. I use the word expectations. That I think there is a failure of expectations with men. I think porn has destroyed generations of young men.
Yes.
I think it has made expectations about what women are, what they like, what you think they want, how they should act towards you is horrible. And if I could wave the magic wand and put something back in the bottle, I'd put that genie back in the bottle.
Oh, geez, absolutely, yes.
And for girls, for the female side, the exact other. We've told them about the toxic masculinity. We've said about how you've been, and I'm not besmirching the trials and travails women have faced in this culture for tens of thousands of years, tens of thousands. And so I'm not trying to assuage that in any way. But the life you live now is so much better than the people who fought for where you are 100 years ago or 50 years ago, for that matter. And I think we get upon the expectation chain of what people should be doing or how they should be doing. And you brought it up earlier. I watch all these polls because of what I do and talk about. There's a large percentage of people who will not date someone who does not have similar views. Now, they said that when you break it down, it's women with more liberal views. They will not date anyone who does not fall into that category. That's it. So their expectations is they have already narrowed it down. They've already put themselves in that pocket, which I always find it interesting and I'm not trying to combat right or left. I'm not. But
I know.
People on the right have less of a concern of your political views. As we've said before, if you have somebody said before, if you have a certain sign up in your yard, you have to worry about vandalism. If you support certain kind, you can put up all the other signs for the other candidate all you want. because the odds are the people on the other side are not going to come vandalize your house.
Yeah.
So we start setting up these expectations, and rarely can anyone meet your expectations. My son was so pissed off last night after basketball practice. I'm like, what's wrong? He goes, I sucked. I played so horribly. Your coach talked to me afterward, and they've got a tournament on a team that you're not even on, and he asked if you could come play. He just had to say that. No, he didn't. You're not on the team.
Yeah.
I said,
Yeah.
but I'm thrilled that you have the expectation of yourself.
Yeah, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I was the exact same way.
Yeah, and so learning that, and I think that's the thing that because the it gets so murky with dating, and I'm so glad I met my wife. I'm so glad I'm not in that. But I always tell everybody I was single for 12 years after my first marriage ended in divorce, and what I found is it seems like I date all these crazy girls, right? Well, one day I had the epiphany that the only thing they had in common was me.
Yes.
And in the South,
Yes.
we have this saying, because I grew up in Alabama: you will catch the kind of fish you want depending on the bait you use.
Yep.
My bait was bad.
Mm-hmm.
My bait was bad. So
Yeah.
once I decided to change my bait, it's amazing what happened.
Yes.
And so I always try to throw that out to my single friends. So how's your bait? What's your bait?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that you bring? What is it that you're looking for? What is it that you exude? What is it that you're willing to accept and not accept? Because both are an equally important question. What's your bait? And,
Yeah.
there were times in my life that I would overlook everything because, man, look at that body,
Yeah. Sure.
right? And then I was shocked by, oh my God, I can't believe she's so, dude, you made that decision. You
Yeah.
made that decision. And you didn't make it with this head.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very interesting. And there's so many says, well, that's why you're third time and you'll be a 4-time guest. Because there's so many different things.
I want to tell you why I am all in on Bison Junk. First and foremost, they are a full-service, eco-friendly junk removal company, but with this difference. They focus on recycling and donating usable goods. Their customer service sets them apart, and they pride themselves on their integrity. They'll show up when they say they will, and they'll do what they promise. If you have hard-to-remove items like hot tubs or large furniture, they figure it out so you don't have to. They want to be who you always come back to when it's time to declutter and organize your home or business. They're worth every penny at bisonjunk.com.
And I also throw in the fear factor, right? And that's when we just to brush up gets on the best therapist I ever had is a friend of mine. And I have one session with him because I was just angry. And what I love about him is he goes, I don't have long-term patience. My job is to literally teach you how to solve your own problems.
It's great.
And then I want you to be done. And so I literally talked to him one day and said, I need to know how to handle my reactions better to things. Right.
Yeah.
And he's like, all right, well, let's talk about that. That's it. And he goes, all right, well, if you ever need to talk again, let me know. There was no, hey, we got to get you back on. There was none of that. And I think because we have made the mental health thing such a thing, as you've said, I think we've made it into a bigger bugaboo than it already is. I think it's awesome that we can talk about it. I think it's awesome that we can say, listen, everybody gets depressed, but not clinically depressed. I've never been clinically depressed, and I thank the good Lord for it.
Yes.
But I also know that the more you sit and dwell in the problems, as I become a parent, one of the things I do with my kids is if they get down, we talk about it out loud. I'll sit back and say, let me see if I've got what's wrong out loud.
Yeah.
And once you say it out loud, it's amazing to go, oh, well, that's not nearly as bad as that. Because in your head, Jesus called Satan the father of lies and the prince of lies. That wasn't a small title. It wasn't a small title, especially in those years.
Yeah.
And we get in there and we start believing the lies because there's just enough truth. And I think every now and then, if we could just have someone we trusted as far as a friend or a family member to go, hey, let's just say it out loud and go from there. Instead of, how does that make you feel?
Yeah.
What can we do
Yeah.
about that? And that's
Mhm.
what I loved I love the whole therapy thing with everything. And I've told you before, and I text Sam all the time. I'm like, I didn't agree with everything you said, but I
Mhm.
love that you made me think about my position. And I
Yeah.
cannot give you a better compliment than that.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I always appreciate those. And you know, Hafiz said essentially the same thing today. He's like, hey man, I thought this article was just a tad bit resentful in terms of ways, and he's not wrong about that. And so like I have my frustrations about the dating market. And so like I'm like not gonna go out and like make a reaction video about like Hafiz Bayoku's like, you know, slanderous comment about me or whatever. Like, no, he's right. And so about the therapy point, I want to maybe start this with something that you said that I think is really, really important. And I think I might have said this in the video, but I think therapy has taken the place of more essential and better institutions in our culture currently, like the family in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
There are no like there were things, you know, I remember this was in my family certainly, and I heard a lot about this in my dad's family, and my mom's family is kind of not as nucleic as my dad. It was kind of more wild in terms of that way. My dad's family was like this, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, Gary. But like there were things. It's like this is a family issue. We're going to work about on this as a family. Like we're going to work this out together. And now what we have done is we say we need an expert for this. So we're going to bring the therapy and the therapist into our family, and we're going to outsource this issue within the family to someone who does not know the family. And like to me, that's insane. Like that is so destructive to the trust, the bonds, the emotional connection that we have to one another. And I think that's what exactly has happened, because now I read a great book, by the way. You should read this book called The Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier. And
Oh,
Abigail
yeah,
Schreier,
Abigail Schreier and Jonathan Haidt.
yeah,
They're
oh
two
my gosh. I mean,
wonderful books.
she wrote an essential book on this. And Abigail is one of my journalistic heroes. She's one of the bravest people I've ever seen in my entire life, because she took on, you know, the therapy industrial complex in a way that no one ever had before inside of this book. And so it's funny enough, I remember, because her book's getting a lot of blowback, like her first book did, and a lot of people were hating on it and said like, this is pseudoscience, like this isn't real, whatever. And so I remember I said, okay, I really like Abigail Schreier, but I'm biased because I really like Abigail Schreier. And so I remember I texted my buddy Steven Javaruski, who's a mental health professional, and he runs a mental health coaching business. And he was reading that book too, and he was reading it. He was a bit ahead of me in terms of his reading process. And I said, take me out of it and take my love for Abigail Schreier out of it. From a scientific mental health perspective, is she right? And he said, dude, she's more right than I've heard anyone talk about it before in my entire life. This is exactly why I did not become a therapist, is because of the stuff she's talking about in that book. And I said, oh boy. And then I went into the book even more, and I started reading it more and more and more. And I remember reading the book, and there's a theme inside of the book. I don't know if you've read it, Gary, but there was a theme in the book about something called iatrogenesis, which is an intense focus on the problem where doctors cause harm to patients by, you know, attempting to solve the problem. It's called iatrogenesis. And I think that's exactly what this mass appeal of therapy has done for a while. Like, it's not that you would go after some traumatic event. It's not like you're Tony Soprano and you have a severe panic attack and you go to therapy for a couple of weeks. And I remember I really started to notice this a lot, because I wrote about it quite a bit in my third book as well. But I remember I really noticed it. I don't know how many podcasts you have in rotation, but I think that Stephen Bartlett of A Diary of a CEO is one of the most phenomenal podcasters out there. Like, he's an amazing listener. He's a great conversationalist. He's such a great communicator. And I love listening to Steve. I don't agree with Stephen on hardly anything, but I love listening to Stephen. And so he had Mia Khalifa on his podcast once, who is a very, very famous porn actress, maybe the most famous porn actress in recent memory. And he had her on to discuss kind of the fallout of her leaving the porn industry. It kind of, you know, 'cause she's a Middle Eastern woman. And so she did a lot of very, you know, sacrilegious things with a hijab and a lot of things inside of her. And so she's blacklisted from her ethnic community. She's blacklisted from the porn community. She can't work anywhere. And so we had her on the show, and she said something that stuck out. And obviously you just talked about how tragic the porn industry is. And I completely agree with everything you said. And the most illuminating comment of that episode was not one about the porn industry. It wasn't one about her life. It wasn't a piece of wisdom that Steven said or that she said. It was when she was talking about therapy and her relationship with her therapist. And she said, I don't think I'll ever leave. And I said, whoa, like you don't think you'll ever leave. And so I said, okay. And you said this kind of when you were saying your own story about it, Gary, like a therapist is a medical professional. They're a mental health professional, but they're a medical professional. They're doctors. And so if you were to go in, if your son breaks his arm and you go into the doctor's office,
Orthopedic.
they
the
cast him
orthopedics.
up and they put everything on it. And the doctor ends the appointment by saying, guys, I don't think the cast is ever going to come off. You'd be like, well, what the hell's going on here? Like, what do you mean? Like, is his arm not going to get better? And she's like, no, I just don't think the cast is ever going to come off. You're going to have to keep coming back every couple of months. And you would be like, you're insane. I'm going to go to another doctor. And you should do that because that's not medicine. That is not a medical procedure. And I've talked a lot about this with my guys in my small group, with my friends, and they've been seeing a therapist for like 4 years. And I said, I'm like, guys, like, what needs to be solved? And they're like, and they're like, well, it's just nice to have someone to talk to. And then so I would say, okay, so what is the point of this group? What is the point of your family? And all my friends mostly have very nice families in a lot of ways. And so like, what is the point of your family? A lot of my friends, like I said earlier, in my small group are married or they're engaged. Can you tell your significant other about that? Can you tell your wife? Can you tell your fiance? And they're like, well, I just want someone else to have that influence my life. And I keep going back to it where it's like, this is insane what we're doing, especially with kids in terms of this. Like the kids you're raising 2 of them, Gary, you know this. I mean, their minds are developing in a very, very essential format, especially in the age that your sons are. And to give an outside person, whether they're an expert or not, that doesn't matter. But to let an expert into your child's head and to influence the way they think about things is insane to me. It's absolutely insane. And it just like, so I look at this and I see that like no one has gotten better from what I've seen from everyone from this. It just doesn't work in most cases. Now, to have a caveat to what you said earlier, if you had death of a family member, you're recovering from a severe illness, like please get help, get your mind right. Please, like go to a mental health professional. But if they are only there to be like your little emotional support therapist or like or whatever, that's an issue. That's a problem. That is a sign of mental fragility. And I think the other thing, and I'll toss back to you, is that the point of modern therapy, and this is where I think the self-improvement model goes wrong as well, to kind of tie it into a little thing we discussed earlier about my philosophy around life going forward. The more you focus on yourself, the more you ruminate, the more you think about what your life is and is not, the more miserable you will be. That is 100% of everything of what it's going to be. So how, like you said it earlier, how are you feeling? How does that make you feel? Probably like shit in a lot of ways. And when you go back from it, it's probably not great in a lot of ways. You keep thinking about like, and how did, and it's the questions about like, it always goes back to child, like, how did your parents mess you up? How did your dad, like spanking you when you were 5 years old, have an impact in the way that you see authority? Like all those type of things. And it turns you, it inverts the essential institutions of life, whether it's the church, whether it's a mosque, whether it's your family or your friends, your grandparents, your parents, or whoever it's going to be. And I just think this is insane. I just think it's completely and totally insane.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I think, to me, a lot of it started with COVID, and we decided that science is political, right? So we're going to figure out what science agrees with us now. And if, oh, by the way, if that science doesn't agree with us later, we're going to reject that science and call you an idiot. Whichever way, on both sides did it. But I also sit back and say, same thing with, I love your analogy. If you had a podiatrist who told you needed to come back every week, are you kidding me right now?
Yeah.
And I also love the fact that you're right. If you're finding someone for your child, and I don't care whether they're trying to or not, they will instill their values in your child.
That's exactly
and
right.
I freely admit that I try to Jedi mind trick my kids all the time, right? And I'll sit back because they're at this age, they're 14 and 12. And I'll talk to them. I'll go, listen, this is what we're going through now. Now, when you have your daughter, when you have your children, you'll probably approach it this way. Or when you meet a girl and this is what your wife is doing, and you'll want to remember that, right? What am I trying to do? I'm trying to influence the way they will treat their partner. I'm trying to influence the way they're looking for a partner. I'm trying to influence the fact that have children. They're amazing because I think especially the entertainment and the comedy industry have made children this laughing stock about
They're a
how
disease.
bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're horrible and they're bad and they're this. And I saw something this morning of these celebrities who decided to never have children, and they were all men, by the way. And what
Oh,
it
really?
boiled down to, like Seth
Wow.
Rogen
Okay. Jeez, that's
and those
terrible.
guys. And what it boils down to is that I just don't have time. And my wife and I love our lives because you think you'll be inconvenienced. You
Yeah.
don't realize how shallow your life is. But and I don't want anybody to not have children who doesn't truly want them. I don't
Sure.
want that.
Right.
But we have convinced a whole generation that children are a burden. And if you want to see an economy go in the toilet, I mean, look at we all like to think of China as this monolithic. They're having major problems with the birth.
They're going to
matter of
be.
fact,
So I remember. I remember. Exactly on this point. Peter Zeihan on Joe Rogan said that China has 10 years left, and he has the evidence to prove it. And it's because of that. It's because they're not having kids. Yes.
Well, and the only continent that is having children is also got some of the fastest growing economies.
It's Africa. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So it's one of those things that we better start telling our kids how awesome it is to have kids. And that's not to try to talk kids into, if you get to be an adult, listen, I got divorced because my ex-wife battled mental health issues because she was off the chart brilliant. And a lot of times when you have an IQ that high, your brain won't shut off. And
Sure.
I'm not besmirching her at all. She was wonderful. She's the one who sat back and said, I don't want to have children. I don't want to pass this on. And I don't trust myself with children as I battle my own brain.
Yeah.
And you go, well, and she goes, but after we had been married for 10 years, this was 2 years in our marriage. She goes, you deserve to be a father. You need to be a dad. And so that's why I give her nothing but kudos because I was like, no, I'm in. She's like, no, you need to do that. But I want to encourage the people that, listen, kids, you will never be more fulfilled if that's where it takes you. If the good Lord leads you there, man, there's nothing better. Kids will say, I was hauling my kids around the other night, trying to get them a Halloween costume and get them dinner. We'd been at all the different past, practices and stuff. And I got in the car and I put my seatbelt on and my oldest goes, hey, Dad. I said, what? He goes, hey, thank you. Thank you for all you did today. I know you've run around like crazy. My youngest went around and said, yeah, Dad, we really appreciate it. And you're like, I can't make you understand.
Yeah.
Awesome that was. Right?
Yeah.
And it would only happen because when somebody understands the effort you're putting in. And those are children. Those are children. And so if anything else, hey, before I get sidetracked, because I've had you for an hour and I know you've got things doing, you've got sales calls to make.
No. I'm good. I'm good for whenever, Gary. So if you want to keep going, let's keep going.
Well, we'll keep going here for a little bit, but what I really wanted to talk about was tell me about value economics. Tell me about what you're doing. Tell me about the community you're building.
Yeah. So thank you. And that was wonderful. I think our culture is getting it's openly antinatalist now, as far as I'm concerned. So yes, I'm have kids, please. But anyways, so for my businesses, so I talked about this a lot when I was kind of narrating my transition out, but essentially I was in corporate America for a while. I worked at the second largest tech company in the world, and did very, very well. They treated me very fairly for the most part. And I remember I got to a point where I wanted to, because, I'm a striver in those type of ways. Like I want the next thing. I'm very much like like I said, I'm driven. I want to chase things. I want to have things that I want to do and achieve things and help people and all that sort of stuff. So I remember I set up a conversation with my manager at the time. He was a wonderful manager. And I asked him about managing people, because I always like to say in the analogy, I'm a point guard. I'm not a shooting guard. I don't like to score points. I like to help other people score points. And so I thought that being a manager in some ways in my old company would allow me to help others score points. And so I remember I set up this, this discussion and this conversation with my career development conversation with my manager and my VP, and I went into the discussion with them, and I gave a pretty good, I worked really hard on it. I practiced it, and I gave a really, really good presentation. My VP is just blown away. And she's just sitting in the back of the room, and she's like, Sam, no one has ever done anything like this to me before. Like, this is amazing. Like, this is great. Like, I love this so much. I really want to help. But we need a commercial justification for the territory in order to carve it out to make a new manager spot. So if we get that, like, let's keep this going. We'll meet again in 6 months. So I said, okay. I put together another presentation. I set her up with her and my manager. I run through it, and I bust my ass for this presentation. Like, I look up like the marginal tax rate, like the amount of entrepreneur capital investment, like like all the numbers that make up because I was dealing primarily in startups and small businesses and helping invest in those and growing those businesses. And so I put that together, and we go into this presentation, and I basically lay everything out. I'm like, this is why we should invest this much. This is the team. This is whatever. And I get to the end of the presentation, and she says, Sam, this is going to be really great for the business development team, but your future's not here, and I think you should just go make presentations for them. And I didn't say anything, and I didn't really make a rebuttal because I didn't know what to say, but I was just kind of shocked. And I remember I had told no one on my floor because I didn't want to, put that's plant that seed on my floor in terms of like, oh, I'm trying to like get above and get a manager position or something like that. I kept it pretty quiet. And so the only person I told was my dad. And I texted him before, and my dad's been very involved in terms of like helping me, especially navigate the corporate world because he's been in his whole life. And so he told me like, hey, after the presentation happens, text me and, like, let me know how you did. So I text my dad and I basically tell him that I bombed. Like I did terrible. And so I text him like I bombed it. And he said, yeah, I thought that would happen. Give me a call in 15 minutes. And now I'm really shocked. And I say like, okay, like I'll call in 15 minutes. And so, he, and so when I called him and I said, Sam, he's like, I know you've been putting a lot of stuff out there about your books, about your podcast. You've been making a lot of posts recently. And they're like, I'm just going to tell you, they're not going to be wanting someone who's not going to put the company at the number one at the center of their universe. And that's just the way it works. And I was really upset about that because I was raised to believe that hard work matters and that merit matters. And that, especially in sales, in which I was one of the top salesmen in the entire company. I brought in $10 million in revenue in 3 years. And I remember I said like, Dad, like I closed the biggest deals. I closed I massive amounts of dollars. My customers love me there. My customers trust me. He's like, Dad, and he's like, I get it. I know, but that's just not how it works. And I knew right then that my career was over inside of that organization. I knew that was it. And so I learned something very, very important that day. And what I learned was that every narrative that the mainstay, and this is not, again, this is generalized, but the mainstay narrative that the corporate world pushes on people, particularly young people, when they're coming into the workforce for the first time after they get out of college, is that if you come in and you work hard and you bust your ass and you do all the things, you'll move up in the company. That's not true. That is not true at all. The number one value of a corporate structure by design, and I get why this is the case, but this is not what's told by them. It is not hard work. It is not merit. It is not value. It is not revenue. It is not anything like that. It's loyalty. It is unquestioned loyalty to the organization, to the apparatus, to the machine, because the corporate world is a machine and they have to provide shareholder value. And the biggest thing that causes corporations to stumble is instability. When there's instability, whether it's at the top of leadership or there's massive corporate, like think of every massive blow up of a company that's ever happened. It's usually one of the two. It's instability in some way or another. They need to keep the machine humming so they can provide consistent returns to their shareholders. And so I was not that because I wasn't putting the company first and I had adversary. And, this whole time as well, I had 2 separate HR investigations going against me. Both were complete BS. Both were unfair, but I was getting witch hunted by HR this entire time. I can kind of hit on those after if you'd like me to, but that was kind of happening as well. And at the same time, I basically had, and around the same time, my former and now current, ironically, publisher Scribe Media had just blown up, and the company went to that instability to that point I just said. And I wrote an expose called the Scribe Media Files. And around that time, about the downfall of the company, I interviewed a lot of people. I was getting like 60 DMs a day from people. And I was putting all this stuff together. I was researching, and I put that article out, and I had all of them on my podcast to tell their stories. And that podcast and that article went quasi-viral for my stance at the time. It got over like 1,000 plays in my Spotify. It got a bunch of shares in my Substack. And I got found by this guy named Owen Samrone. And Owen Samrone, he runs a company called Unleash the Knowledge. And he kind of finessed his way to become a men's basketball manager on the Rhode Island and UConn men's basketball teams under Dan Hurley. And so he got mentored by Dan Hurley this whole time he was when he was in business school, or when he was in school. And so this whole time he was getting kind of this exposure to Dan Hurley and the UConn men's basketball program. He was building this Instagram page called Unleash the Knowledge, and it grew to 128,000 Instagram followers. And he was making money off it. He was selling services off it. And he had a high ticket offer where he realized, and I might have talked about this in a previous podcast, that you don't make any money usually when you write books. You make almost zero money. I've lost unbelievable amounts of money every time I've written a book. And so a lot of people, like I was initially, they are very surprised by this. And they kind of end up like, well, what the heck was even worth that whole effort? And so what Owen did was he created a company to solve that problem, because he made a company that had authors take their nonfiction books and turn them into monetizable products on the back end. And so he reached out to me and he said, hey, dude, like, I think this is really, really solid potential for you and I to work together on this. And all of this was happening at once. And I said, oh my God, this is my way out. Like, this is how I'm going to do this. And so I was swimming in debt by this point. Like I was buried. I was barely making my rent. I almost got kicked out of my apartment a couple of times. I was very fiscally irresponsible for a long time because I was putting my books up and everything. But as soon as I was able to clear my debt out, because I closed a major sale, and then I invested with Owen. And so I built the company up, my first company, Value Economics Academy. I built that up over about 3 months. And I debuted it at the Affluent Standard, the men's group I mentioned, at our conference in Dallas, Texas in December every single year. And so we have a thing on Sundays called InvestCon, where people and men inside the community who are entrepreneurs, are looking for customers, investors, etc., for businesses, can get on stage and present in front of 200 people and just talk about their business. And so I was able to get on the stage, and nearly got kicked off a couple times because someone didn't like that I was on stage. And so I fought my way back on stage, and Hafiz advocated for me, and Joseph Hines, the other guy, they advocated for me to get on stage. And so they're very nice guys. They're good friends of mine. And so I got on the stage, and I'm a pretty humble person, but I crushed it. I did really, really well. I got 2 standing ovations. Everyone was eating out of my hand. And I got people flooding to me afterwards and say, well, how can I invest? How can I invest? How can I invest? And I ended up scaling that company to 6 figures in 7 months and booking out for the rest of the year. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I have a legitimate business now. I spent zero money on paid marketing, no money on ads. No, I was all organic Instagram, Facebook content. They got everything basically together that acted as a funnel for my customer base. And I did really well in terms of the business. The product was great. I have 100% customer success rate. I haven't had a single refund, nothing in terms of anyone rioting and slandering me on the internet. And so I'm running this company at the same time that I'm running and still closing $1 million deals in my sales job. And so I get to a point at the end of the day where I say, I'm going to make this happen. I said it at the conference. I said, I'm going to leave my job and hand in my 2 weeks on July 15th of this year, because that's when our fiscal year ends in the middle of the year. It ends at the end of May. And so I get paid out for my last bonus 45 days after the end of the fiscal. And so on July 15th of this year, I essentially handed in my 2 weeks, and I was out 2 weeks later. I bought a house a couple weeks before to make sure my income was stable for the loan company. So the banks screw over a lot of people anyway. So I thought I'd do one back as my little kind of revolt against the banks. And so I did that to kind of close my house and get my mortgage. And so essentially what the company does is that we help people, and you've read Value Economics, so you could kind of understand this in a way. So basically, we use the process of value economics to help create or people accomplish the biggest goal in their life or solve the biggest problem they have going on in their life. And I sell it as a high ticket offer. And what it does is that basically and the process works. And we've had guys quit porn, quit drinking, start companies, start podcasts, commit to their relationships, create social environments, like everything you could possibly imagine. We've had guys do amazing work and my clients are awesome. And so we were able to scale that impact out to them. And then I left the company and I said, I don't think it's strong enough. And I wanted to get a full offer stack, because every offer kind of has a low ticket offer, a mid ticket offer, and a high ticket offer. I didn't have a high ticket offer or a premium ticket offer yet. And so I look back at my content that I created, and my most popular content pieces were all around, how to make money and how to do well in business and how to do well in sales. And so I had more of the personal development alternative education company, the Value Economics Academy. And then I spun that into helping people do exactly what I did. Because when I announced that I was leaving, I was a pretty big cultural staple inside of the org. Like, people were genuinely shocked that I was leaving, because I was like always on the floor. I was always talking to people, like great relationships with my teammates. My teammates were awesome. And they were all like, and so everyone kind of asked for one-on-one time, or like to say goodbye or whatever, let's get lunch. And so I went in and I had these conversations with my coworkers, and they all asked me almost to a person, what are you going to do? Are you going to go to another tech company, or are you get a better offer somewhere? And I said, no. And I didn't tell them specifically what I was doing, but I told them that I was doing something entrepreneurial. I told them I was starting a company. I started a company. I scaled it up to a certain amount of revenue, and I'm going to be doing that from, for the near future. And they almost to a person again said, wow, I wish I could do that. And I said, well, I did it, so you can. But that is a demographic that's really, really underserved. And I said, okay, that's it. And then I went back after I left the company, and I created what is now known as Value Economics Entrepreneur. And so the Value Economics Entrepreneur is basically, we take the top 1% of corporate talent in the entire world, and we teach them how to build a value-based digital product style income business, like I did with Value Economics Academy, in order to successfully leave their corporate job and live in accordance with their values. And so it's combining the values element with a commercial element, because I believe what's going to change the trajectory of our world the most is people being a force multiplier with the proper value systems. And I think a lot of ways, the biggest way to do that is through entrepreneurship, through people that are doing a lot of ways and starting companies and starting businesses. And we have people, and that's been going over very well. We have people that are in soccer coaching, people who are in wealth management, people who are in tennis coaching, people who are in, I'm trying to think what else, online writing, advertising, AI are working inside of the organization now. And so basically right now I'm projecting to scale at twice the rate that Value Economics Academy has with the Value Economics Entrepreneur. And so we're going at a really, really solid rate right now, which is really, really crazy. And so those businesses are doing well. And that's kind of encapsulated in what I'm calling the value economics movement generally, which is what a lot of the YouTube content is. And a lot of the things that are kind of you're seeing on there. I want to be unapologetic in terms of, I want to have it all. I want to have books, YouTube, podcast, Instagram content, and an actionable item. Whether you can learn this stuff from me, you can come to my free school community that I have, or you can do what I did and be an entrepreneur and start everything from there. And so my goal with all of this, and generally, is just to give people every excuse possible to say yes to their values in a way that they want to, and to kind of recreate this value-driven lifestyle that I think will help a lot of people. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what I've been doing and building.
Absolutely. And we'll have the links on the podcast, and you'll be able to check it out and check out Sam's work and check out his YouTube channel. And if you, like I said, I've always enjoyed the way you approach things. And I love that you zig when I expect you to zag on things. And you're not afraid to question your own politics, which is what I've always enjoyed, because I've got no time or interest for ideologues. If it's your side is always right and the other side is always wrong, that's statistically impossible. It just is. And if you're not willing to look at that, and that's the thing I've always enjoyed, and to see this success, and because I've known you for a few years now, and just to watch this just build up, and you come into this term, and I can remember the first time we really talked, and you were honestly still kind of lost, and I was like, dude, you're gonna be just fine if you can pay attention the way you're doing. You're going to be fine. That's the only thing I try to teach my kids. If I can get you to pay attention, the world is there for you to grab it.
Yeah.
Because the majority of people are not going to pay attention, and the majority of people are not going to work hard. And if you're willing to do both of those, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos did not steal your money. You threw it at them because they work hard. And they have completely different politics, but they have the same work ethics. And so I think it's brilliant. Check out everything Sam does, and then we'll get back on the 4th episode, because this is just one of those things that you're going to be my yearly, maybe quarterly guest. And I've got people that I constantly bring back. And so you're one of them.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Gary. And I think the one thing that we didn't tease up, and well, I think we'll talk more about this. I want you to read it first, but the third book is coming out next summer, and so I'm assuming I want you to read that. I'll send you a copy, and then we'll kind of get everything to set out there. So I'm really excited about it. I'm really curious to see what you think about it, because I think the zigging and zagging point was funny, because I zag pretty hard on this third book, and so I think a lot of people are going to kind of be like, whoa, this is coming out of nowhere, but it's a book that's been on my heart for a while, and I've actually had the idea longer than toxic maturity, I think, in a lot of ways. And so I've been really ruminating and cooking on this one up for a while, so it's going to be good to get it out there.
Count me in. I'm all in. I'll be waiting for the third book, and check out Value Economics. My buddy Sam LaCrosse.
Thank you, Gary. I appreciate it, man. Thank you for sharing your platform, and I'm honored to be a guest so many times. I really appreciate you bringing me back on.